So thank you so much, Joanna, for joining us today.
Thank you.
As part of our career series for Astoria Film Festival, we just wanted to talk to people in the industry and find out what they've done and how they got there, so that kids know different careers and possible paths to those careers.
Okay, yeah. So I initially started my role in production, and I realized after working in a few years as a producer and doing things on the more creative side, what I was doing was realizing I was interested in how audiences were consuming that content. So I would always think to myself, okay, well, I'm creating this content, but who's watching it and how are they watching it and how much of it are they watching? So when I was working for a TV network that was owned by a larger company, Cablevision at the time, they also owned a few other networks. And I had applied for a role at the Independent Film Channel, and that was much more strategic. It was in scheduling operations and acquisitions. And I really got on well with the team, and I really liked the role. And I decided, let me take a chance here and shift over to a more strategic role. And I had really found my niche doing that. So I was planning programming, and I was deciding what programming was going to go on the network and how people were going to watch it, and also going out there and sourcing content. So going to screenings and going to festivals and seeing what appealed to an audience. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I continued with that. So moving on from there, I started to see shifts in the industry. And although I loved my team and I loved what I was doing, I started to see shifts happening to digital after working on a VOD platform that was launched at IFC at the time called IFC Free. And so the building that was happening with the audience and the number of orders that kept increasing year to year, I realized this was possibly going to be the path of the future many years ago. And so I had left and needed a change of lifestyle and moved out to LA and was working in digital publishing before the people I had worked with previously at IFC and then similar networks, sister networks of IFC, went out to launch a network called Pivot, which is under Participant Media, which is an award-winning company. They're known for films like An Inconvenient Truth and Malala, the Malala documentary, and Green Book, and Roma. So they had launched a TV network. And that TV network was aimed towards millennials, and I came on board to acquire content that would appeal to that audience. And so that was a lot of research, and that was a lot of qualitative, quantitative data, going out and taking pitches from filmmakers, going to festivals, meeting with filmmakers, building relationships, negotiating with studios and distributors to bring that content to the audience that would also have a social impact, a long-term social impact. So I had realized that's really where I wanted to stay and wanted to remain focused on long-term on a content strategy role. And so that's where I am now and where I continue to see myself going.
And what was the difference did you find between kind of doing production and doing strategy? Like what kind of would you categorize the two things? Like if somebody has these skills, they might want to do this, and if they like what did you like or dislike in both areas, I guess?
So production is much more about creating a product. You're creating a series, you're creating a film, you're part of that whole process, that creation process. So if that's something you see yourself doing long term, then your interest would be in wanting to create something, being a part of that whole from beginning to possibly end, because it depends on if you see yourself working on the pre-production of something, which is all the planning stages before you actually get to a set. When you get to a set, then you're actually involved in the day-to-day activities. And then you could also want to be in post-production. Do you want to edit the piece? Do you want to be the producer who's involved from beginning to end? Do you want to be the director who's involved from beginning to the end? Do you just want to be the editor who's going to come in at the end of it? It's really figuring out what part of that, of creating that product you want to be a part of.
Mhm.
So while I really enjoyed that, what I had found in creating that product was I was, again, much more interested in how audiences were consuming that product and what was appealing to them.
It's
And
like, where
so,
does it go from the creation out?
correct. So I moved to the other end, more the distribution buyer end, which is once that product is created, who gets to see it and how does it get seen?
Yeah, yeah.
And so those are really the two key differences. Um, I don't dislike one more than the other. I mean, obviously I found my path and my niche to be acquisitions and in that audience consumption. I think for me, what was more difficult about production were the long hours, the uh, the feeling of, okay, what part of this process do I want to be a part of? By the time I had figured out maybe do I want to be a part of that process, what ultimately I had decided was I actually want to be a part of the process later on, which is what happens to that product once it's created and who gets to see it. Because you're not thinking about those things generally in production. You're just making something that
Yeah.
people are going to see. I mean, you're thinking you want it to do well. Obviously, you're creating a product because you want people to see it. But it's opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of, I think people don't realize that there's different silos to work in the industry, and that, do you find the crossover happens frequently? Is it easy? Or do you kind of have to pick a path and stay down it? Like, what's your experience been
I think a
in
little bit of it
switching
is.
from production to distribution? Was it hard for you to get a foot in that door?
I think for me, again, it came from a little bit of his luck, a little bit of is how you uh, make those connections and how you reach out to people. You know, many times, a lot of the jobs I applied for was because I simply applied and I had skills to back it up. And so it allowed for that initial conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, making that transition from news producer to programming was I think because of the fact that I had already had an in with the company.
Yeah.
So that helped with the transition. So that's really important. I would say is being able to see those things, but also, you know, once it's a very big industry and you can have very many jobs. And so for the most part, you kind of know if you want to be a creative, if you want to be on the business side, sometimes those things shift. But the way those things shift is once you're in there doing it and you start to see there's other opportunities. So you can make that transition when you're there. Usually once you're in, they always say get your foot in the door. So once you get one foot in the door, you start to see how all of the departments work, whether it's marketing or PR or production or programming or acquisitions or operations. Once you start to see, I always say talk to everyone, see what everyone is doing. And then you'll start to feel that interest.
Yeah.
You know, you'll start to maybe lean towards things that are more interesting to you, and then perhaps there will be an opportunity for you to get an in that department. And so for me, it was being open to those opportunities, and I had the extra bit of time, having finished school a little bit earlier, to allow myself that, you know, chance to figure out where it was I wanted to end up.
And you also said about internships being important.
Yeah, internships are, I would say, very important, especially when, you know, you are in college. Start thinking about, if you're fortunate enough to be in a college where you can take 2 or 3 internships for credit, take one early, take one, you know, when the earliest you can, because usually internships, I would say, aren't available right away. I don't believe that they're usually available in your freshman year. You usually have to be, you know, a little bit further along. But if your college allows a maximum of 3 internships, take those 3 internships and do them all at different places. But looking back, I would say the most important internship should be the one that you take your senior year in your final semester, because that will give you your quote unquote foot in the door to potentially get hired at that company.
Yes.
Since you already have those connections there.
And like we were saying, so since people know how you work and who you are, it's a lot easier to get a job if it opens up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's proving yourself and proving that you are, you don't exactly have the skill set yet, but you are proving yourself to be a hard worker and capable of handling the job and handling the role, and showing them that you can do it.
It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Initially, it's really just being able to prove that you're capable of being able to handle the work
So a lot
and
of
are
people
willing
are,
to build those skills.
I think that's important because I think a lot of people feel like, oh, if I didn't do this before, then I can't apply for that job. But you're
Yeah.
saying if you can get in there and you're dedicated and you pick things up quickly, you don't necessarily have had to do that before.
Right, right. It's very much about dedication, and it is. I've seen so many people transition, myself included, transition to different roles and evolve with the industry. And it's really important not only to network and get your foot in the door, but to maintain and find the right mentors and find the right people in the industry who are going to help guide you and give you the right advice, and maybe see things that you're not seeing about where you should be in the industry. Maybe they see your strengths and your weaknesses that you haven't really identified yet. So having those right mentors and those right leaders who can help guide you are also key.
And so just connections in general are critical, right? Because
Absolutely.
if you don't have that, whether they're mentors or even kind of like side steps, like peers are also critical if you're going to move around and get different gigs.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's maintaining those relationships because people do move around a lot in the industry. So when you've worked with someone, they may end up at another company, and then you find yourself looking for work, and then you reach out to them, and then vice versa. They may find themselves looking for their next gig, and they can reach out to you if you're someone else. This industry is constantly evolving. So it's really important to maintain those connections.
I think now more than ever it's evolving. So
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah,
Um,
I think this information is good for people of all ages at this point, given how much things are changing at the moment,
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's just, and given the current state of the situation, it's obviously not as easy. It's a little bit more challenging to network and stay on top of everyone. And you can't do your typical coffees and dinners and lunches the way you would before, or take meetings with people. And when you're meeting someone for the first time over a conference call or over a video chat, it is a little bit of a different vibe. So you have to turn on a new level of personality and a new level of ability to be able to speak to people, since you don't
Absolutely.
have that one-on-one interaction in person.
But then also I think what I've heard from people is that like a lot of executives are more available now because they're not at coffees and lunches all the
Yeah.
time. So it's like you can kind of reach out and possibly get a response where you might not have a year ago, so.
That's true, and there's no harm in doing so. LinkedIn is a valuable resource. A lot of these networking sites are valuable resources to just send an email and say, hey, I'm really interested in what you do. I could see myself potentially doing that role in the future, or I'd love to learn more about what you do so that I can understand if this is something I want to do.
Yes.
So, reaching out to people, and hopefully they do have more time on their hands and they can help and take, even if it's just for 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
Yep.
The more you can understand about what everyone's role is, the more you can understand clearly for yourself, perhaps where you see yourself in the long term.
That's huge. Two things I try to get across to kids is one, have a LinkedIn account, and two, like, yeah, reach out to people and just say, hey, I'd like to learn more about what you do without any like expectation of a job,
Right.
just wanting to really talk because people appreciate that, I think, and they might keep
Absolutely.
you in mind for the future. So
Absolutely. And I would also say, just to anyone who does do that, don't get discouraged if you don't get a response from someone. People will respond, and you just want to keep going. You want to keep pushing. because this is something you're passionate about and something you want to do. So reach out to as many people. There's a lot of people in the industry, a lot. And a lot of them are more than happy and more than willing to take a conversation and happy to speak.
Thank you so much, by the way, for being that person willing to speak with us.